The cold in Azkaban did not sit upon the skin so much as it moved into it, seeking out the secret places where a man kept himself. It hunted the softness behind the ribs, the warmth in the throat, the bright nerve that carried laughter, and it fed. Sirius lay on stone that sweated brine. Above him the ceiling wept slow drops that fell with patient cruelty. There was no night or day that mattered, only the drift of light as torches guttered and were replaced, and the slow calendar of hunger. He had learned the language of that place, the hiss of wind through cracks in black masonry, the distant clank of chains like a memory of bells, the rasped breathing of men who were becoming less than men. Worst was the sound the guards did not make. The Dementors moved without weight, without scraping soles, without breath. They were absence given shape. When they passed, every thought turned rancid. At first, Sirius had begged. Then he had raged. Then he had done nothing at all, for a time so long, he could not have named the year even if someone had asked. In that quiet, the mind tried to save itself by eating itself. It replayed the same scenes until they were thin as parchment and tore. James's grin in a smoky kitchen, Lily's hair catching the sun, the weight of Harry in his arms, impossibly small, as if he were made of breath and promise. Then the flash of green, the sound that came after, and the silence that followed like a tomb being sealed. Those memories were what the Dementors wanted. They pulled them out, peeled them open, and held them up to rot. Sirius had learned to starve them, which was not the same as living. He became careful with remembering. He kept a single truth folded tight, a shard he could not afford to lose, because it was not joy, and so it was harder for the Dementors to taste. I didn't do it. In that first year, he had repeated it until it was nothing but a shape his mind clung to in the dark. Later it became something else, sharper. Not innocence, not even survival. A direction he had not always been able to transform. The walls of Azkaban were old and cruelly crafted. They drank magic. It was like trying to light a match underwater. But Sirius had patience that had once belonged to a boy who could not sit still. In the emptiness, patience was a weapon. He practiced the trick of it in his head long before his body could follow. He imagined the shift of bones, the roll of skin, the narrowing of thought into simpler lines. He imagined the creature he had become in secret as a teenager. A great black dog with a chest like a barrel and a mind that could hold its grief without giving it language. The Dementors could not starve a dog the way they starved a man. They could chill it, sicken it, turn its instincts sour. But the hopelessness they poured into a human heart was a wine too complex for an animal to savor. Sirius waited for the rare moments when the prison thinned, when a storm screamed so loudly the very stones seemed to shiver, and the Dementors drifted, uncertain, as if the raging world outside disturbed even them. In those moments, the cold changed. It became a living thing, moving in restless currents. And something else came with it, noise. The prison's attention turned outward. He lay with his face to the wall, counting heartbeats that did not want to be counted, and he made the decision again and again until it became less a decision than a fact. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. In the corridors somewhere beyond his bars, a man cried out, a raw, hoarse sound that ended abruptly. The Dementors answered with their own soundless press, and the air thickened as if a fog had been poured into the world. Sirius closed his eyes. He did not run from the memory that came. James, falling. Lily, turning. He simply watched it pass, refusing to give it his breath. He waited. He listened. He endured. And one night, when the wind hit the fortress with enough force to rattle iron, Sirius felt something loosen inside the stones, some ancient seam that had held too long. The torch outside his cell guttered and went out. Darkness took the corridor. The cold became sharper, like a knife discovering its edge. Sirius turned his face to the bars and began to change. Pain had always been part of it. even in the bright recklessness of youth. Back then, it had been a thrilling ache, the body protesting the mind's audacity. Here it was different. His body was not fed, not loved, not warmed. It was a thing kept alive by stubbornness and salt air. The transformation dragged across him like a saw. He clamped his teeth, already stretching, sharpening, and forced the sound back into himself. A scream would be a beacon. The prison was built for screams. The prison listened for them. His fingers lengthened. The joints cracked with wet, dull pops. The nails tore into black claws. His spine arched, vertebrae shifting like stones rolling into a new wall. His ribs expanded, and for a moment he could not breathe. Then his lungs found their new shape and pulled in air with an animal's efficiency, thick with sea and rot and cold iron. His mind narrowed. It did not lose itself. He held tight to the core of who he was, but the edges softened. Words became less important. Smell became everything. The corridor carried the stench of despair, old sweat, mildew, blood. Under it all, the sharp, clean bite of the storm. It smelled like freedom. It smelled like danger. Sirius, no, the dog that was Sirius, pressed its muzzle to the bars. The iron was chilled enough to burn. The spaces were narrow, but a dog's skull was not a man's. He angled his head, turned, pushed. Bone scraped. Skin caught, then slid. His body followed with a slow, grinding certainty. Outside the cell, darkness throbbed. The torch had failed again. The wind made a sound like laughter gone wrong as it forced itself through cracks in the stone. Water ran in little rivers down the walls. Somewhere above, a door slammed. The Dementors did not react the way men would have. They did not shout. They did not run. They shifted, subtly, as if the air itself were thinking. They drifted closer, sensing motion, sensing the possibility of prey. The dog crouched low, belly close to the slick floor. It moved without the clumsy panic of a human. It moved as it had once moved through moonlit school corridors, all quiet pause and mischief. It moved as if it belonged to darkness. A Dementor slid around a corner, and even in the dog's simpler mind, Sirius felt the pressure of it, the way it thinned the world. The creature's hood turned somehow toward him. It did not have eyes, but it did not need them. Sirius froze. In stillness, in animal stillness, he found a shield he had never had as a man. He made his breath slow. He made his heart slower. He became a patch of shadow on stone. The Dementor drifted nearer. Cold pooled. The smell of it was worse than any rot, an empty smell like a room after a fire. It leaned, as if sniffing. In Sirius' mind, a memory tried to push itself forward. The sound of James' laugh, bright and immediate. The Dementor responded, hungry. Sirius shoved the memory down like a blade returning to its sheath. No, not that. Not now. The Dementor hovered a heartbeat longer, then moved on, drawn by louder misery somewhere else. Sirius waited until its absence was a loosening in the air. Then he continued. He did not run. Running made noise, and noise drew attention. He moved with intent, following the faintest drafts, the tiny differences in the cold that suggested open space. The dog's nose found corridors Sirius' human senses would never have understood. Azkaban was a fortress built like a throat. It swallowed you. It was meant to keep you. Yet even the best-built things had flaws. Old neglected cracks, places where water had worn stone into weakness. The storm had been chewing at those weaknesses for hours. He found a narrow service passage, barely more than a slit between blocks, where damp had turned mortar to mud. He squeezed in, body flattening, ribs compressing with a grunt. Stone scraped fur. His shoulders snagged. He twisted and pulled free, leaving hair behind like a trail of black thread. The passage angled upward. Wind pushed down it, carrying the wet salt of open sea. Sirius climbed. His claws found purchase. He moved by instinct and will. Above, a grate rattled as the storm hammered it. Beyond it, darkness roared. The dog shoved. Iron gave, grudgingly, as if reluctant to admit defeat. Sirius pushed through into the storm. The world outside hit him like a fist. Wind tore at his fur, flattening it to his body, turning him into a slick shadow. Rain came sideways, hard enough to sting. The sea below was not a surface but a furious heaving thing, white teeth biting rock. Azkaban rose behind him, a jagged silhouette against lightning, like the spine of some dead beast. The ledge was narrow. One wrong step and he would be nothing but a black shape tossed into foam. Sirius lowered himself to the stone and crawled, belly scraping, paws slipping on wet slickness. The dog's mind did not contemplate heroism or fate. It knew only the next grip, the next breath, the necessity of moving away from that cursed fortress. Every instinct screamed to run, to put distance between himself and the mouth that had almost consumed him. A siren of the prison, an ancient bell, deep and mournful, began to toll somewhere within the towers, muffled by wind. Perhaps the storm had shaken it loose, or perhaps someone had noticed the empty cell at last. The sound rolled across the sea like a funeral prayer. Sirius' ears flattened. He moved faster. The cliff face offered a line downward, jagged footholds and narrow seams. He descended with desperate care. Rock tore at his pads. Water ran in his eyes. Lightning flared again, showing him the drop. Too far, too furious, too final. At the base of the cliff, where stone met the sea in a violent collision, there was a narrow gap between two slabs, a place where waves surged but did not fully swallow. Sirius waited, timed the rhythm, and leapt. For a heartbeat, he was airborne, weightless, a dog-shaped thought against a wild sky. Then he hit the wet stone hard, claws skidding, and scrambled into the gap as a wave exploded over him. Water filled his mouth, his nose, his ears. Cold punched into him like a living thing. He held, claws dug deep. The wave passed. The next came. He held again. He could not stay. The gap was not a refuge. It was a pause before death. But it bought him seconds to orient. He looked out at the sea, and in the brief wash of lightning he saw it. A line of dark shapes far off, low and rough against the water. Rocks. A path, broken and treacherous, that the storm revealed in glimpses. The dog's body trembled. The prison's bell tolled again. The sound had changed, sharper, urgent. That was not the storm's doing. That was discovery. Sirius surged out into the water. The sea was a monster with no mind and no mercy. It rolled him, smashed him against stone, filled him with salt. His limbs flailed, but he found rhythm. The dog knew how to swim. It did not question why. It simply did it. He had been to the sea with James and Remus and Peter, once, a foolish summer day when they had been young enough to believe that laughter could make them immortal. The memory flashed, thin and bright, and the sea tried to snatch it away. Sirius bit down on his own grief, used it as anchor. He swam. Waves carried him toward the rocks, and then past them, and then, cruelly, away. He fought, found a current that dragged less and clawed his way through it. Salt burned his eyes. His muscles screamed. His body was not built for endurance in this state, starving and hollow. The dog's will, however, was enormous. Another wave rose like a wall. It lifted him and flung him forward. Sirius hit rock with a jarring impact that rang through bone. He scrambled, half drowning, onto a slab slick with algae. He lay there for a moment, shuddering, while the sea hissed around him like an angry crowd. Beyond the rocks, a darker stretch of water, and beyond that, a shape that might have been land, or might have been the storm line. Sirius stood. He did not look back at Azkaban. To look back would be to acknowledge it still had claim. He moved forward, one battered step at a time, and let the storm try and fail to push him into surrender. Land was not a gift. It was merely a different kind of hardship. The coast he reached was raw and empty, a stretch of stones and torn kelp where the wind had free rein. The sky was the color of old tin. Dawn did not brighten, it simply arrived, a pale acknowledgement that time still moved. Sirius dragged himself up the beach on trembling legs. The dog's body shook so hard it seemed his bones might rattle apart. He found the shadow of a boulder and pressed into it, seeking shelter from the wind. His fur held water, and the water held cold. For a long time he lay there, muzzle on paws, listening. Not for dementors. There were none here, thank whatever scraps of mercy still existed, but for voices, footsteps, the sounds of a world that could catch him and throw him back into the sea prison. There was only the surf and distant gull cries. Somewhere inland, faint, the bleat of sheep. The smell of smoke drifted from far off. It was strange. The first silence without despair in it. Strange enough that Sirius could not trust it. He kept himself small, kept his breathing slow. His body demanded sleep. His mind refused. Eventually hunger drove him. Hunger was not the gnawing emptiness of Azkaban, where you ate because eating marked the hours. This hunger was animal, simple, and sharp. It made decisions for him. He moved along the coast, staying low, avoiding open spaces. He found a fisher's hut perched on a rise, its wood dark with salt. Nets hung like dead things from hooks. A boat lay overturned, its ribs exposed. The place smelled of fish and tar and human sweat. Life had been here recently. Sirius circled wide. His ears caught it, the faint creak of a door, the scrape of a boot on wood. A man's cough. The fisher emerged, hunched against the wind, and spat into the dirt. He wore a heavy coat with a hood. His hands were raw and red from cold and work. Sirius' stomach twisted. He did not want to hurt anyone. He wanted too many things, most of them impossible. But he needed warmth. He needed cloth. He needed to stop looking like a creature crawled out of hell. He waited until the man went back inside. Then, quick as shadow, Sirius slipped behind the hut, nosed at the door. It was latched, but not locked. With careful pressure, he lifted it. It opened with a soft complaint. Inside was dim, lit by a small window smeared with salt. A table, a chair, a rough bed, a shelf with a loaf of hard bread and a wedge of cheese. The smell made Sirius's mouth flood. He grabbed the bread in his teeth and backed out. He did not take much. He did not have the luxury of pride, but he still had something like a code, battered and stubborn. He took only what he needed to keep moving. Behind the hut, in a pile of old cloth, he found a discarded woolen blanket, damp but serviceable. He dragged it away, far enough that if the fisher came looking, the trail would not be obvious. There, in the lee of another boulder, he changed back. The transformation hurt worse going the other way. His body, human again, was a fragile thing. He lay on the stones, naked and shaking, skin prickling with cold. He pulled the blanket over himself, biting down on a sob that was half pain, half relief, half something else he could not name. He ate the bread with hands that trembled so badly he dropped it. He did not care. He scraped crumbs from the stones and swallowed them. His throat was raw. His belly cramped. When he finished, he lay back and stared at the sky. His face was a skull stretched with skin. His hair hung in wet ropes. His wrists were thin as reeds. He looked like a man already dead. Yet his eyes were alive. They tracked the gulls. They watched the clouds. They waited for the next thing, because the next thing existed. That was the difference. In Azkaban, everything ended in the same place. Here, the path branched, even if it led through thorns. Sirius pulled the blanket tighter and forced his mind to work. He needed to get south. He needed to reach the world where magic lived. Not because he trusted it, he trusted very little now, but because in the Muggle world he was an animal in a cage of ignorance. Wizards would know his face, his name, his supposed sins. But wizards also knew other things. They knew where the boy was. Harry. His throat tightened around the name. He hadn't spoken it aloud. It felt dangerous to do so, as if saying it might summon attention. But the thought itself was a warmth in the cold. He had to see him, even if he could not touch him, even if it ended with Sirius chained again in darkness. He had to know the child lived. He shifted, grimacing as bruises protested, and began to crawl inland. The first village he reached was small enough that everyone seemed to know everyone else, and that made it dangerous. Sirius kept his head down, the blanket now wrapped like a cloak, its rough wool scratching his skin. He had stolen a pair of boots from behind the fisher's hut. Old, too big, but better than bare feet on stone and ice. They slapped against his heels as he walked. He moved like a man who did not wish to be remembered. The village smelled of coal smoke and wet dog and onions. Windows glowed with lamplight. Through one, Sirius saw a family gathered around a table. A child laughed at something, and the sound hit him like a spell. For a moment he stopped, fingers tightening on the edge of his makeshift cloak. A Dementor's chill was not here, but the memory of it lived in him, and it recoiled at joy like a wound flinching from touch. He forced himself to keep moving. In a narrow alley behind a public house, he found a rubbish bin and tore through it with grim practicality. He ate a bruised apple. He drank rainwater collected in a broken bucket. He found a torn coat, damp and stinking of ale, and layered it under the blanket. He looked like a beggar. That was useful. People saw beggars the way they saw puddles, annoyances to step around. He needed money. He needed a map. He needed a way to travel without leaving a trail of magic for someone to follow. His wand was gone. His pockets held nothing but old lint and the sharp edges of memory. There were ways. He had grown up in a house where wealth was like blood, present assumed, poured into you until you either became it or choked on it. The old house was still there, hidden behind wards and family pride. He could go. He could take what was his. But he could also be trapped. The Blacks did not do anything without a hook in it. Sirius swallowed his hunger and walked toward the edge of the village, where a road ran dark between fields. The wind had teeth. It worried the hems of his stolen cloth. He followed the road until the village lights were distant, and only the stars watched him. He walked until his legs trembled with exhaustion. He was not used to long distances on foot. In the old world, there had been apparition, flu powder, broomsticks. Here, he had only stubborn muscles and an empty stomach. At last he found a derelict shed in a field, and climbed inside. It smelled of damp hay and mice. He lay on the ground and pulled his cloak around him. Sleep came in fits, full of faces. James looked at him with betrayal in his eyes, and Sirius tried to explain and could not speak. Lily stood behind James, holding Harry, and her expression was something worse than anger. It was disappointment, cold and final. Then the scene shifted and Sirius was in the street, laughing, wand in hand as green light filled the air. He tried to drop the wand. He tried to scream. The dream would not let him. He woke with a gasp, heart hammering. For a moment, he did not know where he was. The shed walls pressed close. The smell of hay. The sound of wind. No chains. No screaming. No Dementors. He pressed his palm to his face, feeling the sharp bones beneath skin. He was alive. He was outside. Outside meant choices. Outside meant consequences. Outside meant he could fail in new ways. In the dark, he listened to his own breathing until it steadied. Then he got up and stepped back onto the road, because the only way to keep the past from swallowing him was to keep moving. By dawn, he reached a larger town, one with a train station and a river cutting through it. He stayed away from the station at first, watching from a distance. Muggle police walked the platform. Posters hung on walls, faces, names, notices. Sirius' stomach tightened. He imagined his own face on such paper. He imagined the word murderer in block letters. But the Muggles didn't know him. They had their own monsters. He slipped into a public library, drawn by instinct. Books were safe, once. He moved between shelves with the careful quiet of a hunted thing. In a corner, he found maps. He found old newspapers. He sat at a table, hunched, and opened a paper with hands that still shook. The date stared at him. 1983. 2 years. Only 2. For a moment he felt disoriented, as if the prison had stretched time into something thicker, and now it snapped back, leaving him raw. Harry would be small. A toddler, still. He had missed his first words. He had missed his first steps. He had missed everything. Sirius' throat burned. He closed his eyes. He could not afford grief. Grief was a luxury for safe men. He found London on the map. He traced roads with a finger. He planned, because planning was the only thing he had that resembled control. And under the planning, like a heartbeat, was a thought he did not say aloud. I'm coming. London in winter was a beast of a different kind. It did not bite with teeth of stone and sea. It smothered with smoke and noise. Sirius moved through its streets like a ghost, keeping to alleys, avoiding the main thoroughfares where crowds could swallow him in the wrong way. Even in rags, he was conscious of his face, of how it might be remembered. The wizarding world loved a story, and his story had been told so often it had hardened into truth for those who hadn't questioned it. He had not yet heard his own name spoken since escaping. That was both blessing and curse. It meant the ministry might not know. It also meant he did not know what they believed now, what they had said, how the rumor had grown in his absence. He found the old pub by following instinct and scent. The leaky cauldron had always been a hinge place, a door hidden in plain sight. Muggles walked past it without seeing. Wizards saw it because they expected it. Sirius did not expect safety. He expected only answers. He watched from across the street, eyes narrowed. Wizards moved in and out, their cloaks fluttering in the damp wind. A plump witch with a basket of vegetables. A tall man with a stiff collar and a briefcase that looked far too heavy for its size. A pair of teenagers with laughter that was too bright for the weather. Sirius' chest tightened at the sound. He turned away until it passed, then forced himself to look again. He could not walk into that place as a man. Not yet. Even if no alarm had been raised, even if the wizarding world still believed him locked away, there were faces in there who might know him. And if one person recognized him, one barkeep, one passing aura, it would end. He stepped into an alley and shifted. The dog came more easily now, as if his body had remembered what it was meant to be. As Padfoot, he trotted toward the pub with head low, tail tucked. To Muggles, he was just a stray. To wizards, he might still be just a stray. The wizarding world was many things, but it was not always kind to animals with no owner. At the door, he waited. A wizard emerged, adjusting gloves. Sirius slipped between his legs and into the warmth. The smell hit him. Beer, smoke, wet wool, and beneath it all, magic, old and comfortable. It was like stepping into a memory that had been kept alive by other people. Tom the barman was behind the counter, older than Sirius remembered. His back bent, his face lined. He did not look up as Sirius padded past. He was wiping a mug with a rag that had seen better decades. Sirius moved toward the hearth, where patrons gathered in clusters. He lay down near the edge of the fire's heat, not too close to draw attention, close enough that warmth seeped into his bones. He kept his ears pricked, his nose alert. Wizard talk was a different music than Muggle talk. Names mattered. Houses mattered. Gossip was currency. Still can't believe they let some of them off, someone was saying, voice thick with disdain. Imperious this, imperious that. They'd claim anything to keep their skins. Barty's not having it, another replied. He wants them in chains. Says if they're not guilty, they can prove it. The first snorted. And how do you prove a thing when everyone's afraid to look you in the eye? The war's over, but it's not over. Sirius' stomach tightened at the mention of Barty. Bartemius Crouch, sharp as a blade, proud as a banner. The man had loved law the way some men loved blood. He had been one of the loudest voices calling for punishment, for certainty, for simple answers. Simple answers had put Sirius in Azkaban. A witch, at a nearby table, leaned forward. "Did you hear about the Potter boy?" Sirius' ears lifted so sharply his whole body tensed. What about him? Still with those muggles, apparently. Dumbledore's idea. Blood protection, they say. "Poor lamb," someone murmured. "After everything, better than being raised in the spotlight," the witch replied. "You know what people are like. They'd be sticking him on pedestals, parading him around like a prize." "No, I dare. Ah." Sirius' breath caught. With those muggles. The words were knives. He imagined Harry in a strange house, surrounded by people who did not understand him, did not love him. Dumbledore's idea. He had known Albus had taken Harry, had decided what would happen next. At the time, Sirius had been too lost in grief and rage to think beyond Peter. He had gone after him, like a dog after a scent trail, and had ended in shackles. Now he felt the weight of that mistake like a stone on his chest. A man with a thin mustache, a ministry type, shook his head. "It's the safest place. Dumbledore doesn't do things without reason." "Doesn't mean it's kind," someone replied softly. Sirius' claws dug into the floorboards. He wanted to stand up, to snarl, to announce himself, to demand where, exactly, those muggles lived. He held still. Rage would not help Harry. Rage had never helped. He forced himself to listen. Surrey," the ministry man said after a moment, lowering his voice. "Little town. Doesn't matter. You won't find it on any map worth reading. That's the point." Surrey. It was something. Not enough, but something. Sirius lay by the fire until his fur dried and his body stopped trembling. He watched wizards come and go. He memorized faces. He stored scraps of information like a man hoarding coins. When he left, slipping out behind another patron, the rain had eased into a steady mist. London's stones gleamed. Sirius padded into the alley and shifted back, pulling his cloak close. Surrey. Blood protection. Dumbledore. 3 words, each heavier than the last. He walked into the city's damp gray maze with them lodged in his mind like nails. He found the street the way you found an old scar, by touch, by instinct, by the way the body remembered pain. The row houses were indistinguishable to the untrained eye. Brick, iron, soot. Yet Sirius knew where the gap should be, where the world folded around secrets. The air changed there, growing still, as if the fog itself held its breath. Number 12 sat behind that held breath like a clenched fist. He could not see it. Not fully. He could feel it, though. The old wards humming faintly beneath his skin. A recognition like a shiver. The house was a sealed mouth, keeping its secrets in, keeping strangers out. It had kept Sirius out too, even before he was branded traitor. He stood at the edge of the place where it would reveal itself, if he said the right words, if he called on blood and name. His hand rose, almost on its own, fingers curling as if they held a door knocker. His mother's voice rose in his mind, sharp as vinegar. Disappointment. Fury. The family crest. The rhetoric of purity. Sirius' stomach churned. If he went in, he would have a roof. Food, perhaps. Old gold hidden in drawers. Dark artifacts. Family books. Clothes that fit. A wand, maybe, if one remained. He would have resources. He would also have a trap. The Blacks were not kind even in death. The house might alert the family, what was left of it. It might alert the ministry. It might have wards that recognized him and did something worse than lock him out. And there was another reason, one he did not like to look at. Going into that house would feel like surrender, like becoming the thing they had always said he was. An heir returning, crawling back. Sirius lowered his hand. His fingers shook. He took a step away, then another. The fog swallowed him. Number 12 remained hidden, brooding behind its silence, and Sirius felt its pull like gravity, old and vicious. He resisted, because resisting had been his entire life. He moved through London until the streets grew less familiar, until he reached a quieter neighborhood where houses sat behind small fences and trimmed hedges. The air here smelled less of soot, more of damp earth. Surrey was not London proper, not exactly, but the city bled outward, and he followed its veins. By the time he found Privet Drive, it was late. The street lamps were lit. The houses were identical, a mockery of choice. Curtains were drawn. The street was quiet in that particular way. Quiet neighborhoods were quiet, an enforced quiet, maintained by collective agreement. Sirius stood at the corner, half in shadow. He could smell the place before he understood it. Not magic, not yet. A smell of polish and stale tea. Of people who scrubbed their lives until nothing honest remained. Then the magic hit him, subtle and immense. It wasn't like Hogwarts, where enchantments hummed brightly, layered like music. This was different, quiet, intimate, wrapped around one specific point. It clung to the house at number 4 like a net woven from blood. Sirius' throat closed. Albus had done this. Albus had sealed Harry inside a muggle home and called it protection. He moved closer, staying in shadows. There were bushes near the front garden, low and stiff. Sirius crouched behind them, the cloak soaking through as he pressed into damp leaves. Through the window, he saw a living room with ugly furniture. A television flickered, casting pale light. A man sat in an armchair, large and red-faced, his mustache thick. A woman moved around him, thin and sharp, her mouth set in a line. A boy, older than Harry, chubby and smug, played with a toy, laughing. Sirius' hands clenched. Vernon Dursley and Petunia Dursley were names he had heard once or twice in James' stories, spoken with bewilderment. Lily's sister. The sister who had turned away. Harry was not in the room. Sirius waited, heart beat loud in his ears. Minutes passed. Then the woman, Petunia, walked to a door and called sharply, "Boy!" A small figure appeared at the top of the stairs. Harry Potter, 3 years old, all thin limbs and dark hair sticking up like a question. He wore clothes too big for him, hand-me-downs that hung awkwardly. His face was pale. Even from across the street, Sirius could see the shadowed bruises of exhaustion beneath his eyes. The wary way he held himself, as if expecting to be struck for existing. Sirius' vision blurred. For a moment the street, the house, the world, all of it wavered as if seen through water. He pressed a hand to his mouth to keep from making a sound. Harry looked down at the adults with an expression Sirius recognized too well. Cautious hope. The kind that had learned to hide itself quickly when it was not met. Petunia pointed. "Take this up, and don't make a mess." Harry took whatever she handed him, something wrapped, perhaps laundry, and turned, small shoulders hunched. As he climbed the stairs, the boy in the living room, Dudley, threw something at him. It hit the banister with a clatter. Harry flinched but did not look back. Sirius' breath came in sharp, angry pulls. The magic around the house thrummed as if warning him away. He could not step onto the property without feeling it press at his skin. The protection was real. He could taste it, metallic and ancient. He could not take Harry. Not tonight. Not like this. But he could watch. He could learn. He could make sure the boy lived through these years with fewer scars than he otherwise would. Sirius sank lower behind the bushes, cloak soaking, and stared at the lit window until the light flicked off and the house went dark. In the dark, he whispered, barely audible, "I'm here." Harry could not hear. The wards would not allow it. But saying it made Sirius feel less like he was dissolving. He stayed until the cold became a deep ache in his bones. When he finally moved away, it was with reluctance so intense it felt like tearing skin. He did not know where he was going next. He only knew he could not stay here and do nothing. And he knew, with a clarity that settled like ice, whatever Albus had planned Whatever protection he believed he had built, Harry was being raised among people who did not know how to love. That could not stand. Not forever. He moved on. He walked until he found a park, a stretch of trees and damp grass bordered by neatly trimmed hedges. The place was empty. Even the night seemed reluctant to linger here. Sirius stood beneath a bare-limbed oak and listened to his own breathing. His mind churned with images. Harry's small face, Petunia's sharp mouth, Vernon's complacent bulk. The way Dudley had thrown the toy like cruelty was play. Sirius' hands shook with a desire to smash something, to break the perfect order of that tidy street until it bled. He pressed his palms to the tree's bark, rough and cold, grounding himself. Rage was easy. Rage was a straight line. Rage had led him into the street after Peter. Rage had ended with laughter echoing in his ears as Aurors arrived, with the taste of blood on his tongue as he stopped fighting. He could not be ruled by it again. He forced himself to think like the man James had trusted, the man Lily had handed her baby to without hesitation. The godfather, the guardian, not the prisoner, not the animal. Albus had put Harry here for a reason. Blood protection. The phrase sounded like an excuse. Yet, magic had rules, and Albus was not careless with them. If Harry truly was safest here, then Sirius could not simply snatch him away without risking something worse than bruises and hunger. But safety was not the same as kindness, and there were other forms of protection besides wards. Sirius looked up as an owl swept overhead, a pale shape against the dark. It vanished into the night. For a moment he imagined grabbing it, tying a note to its leg, sending it to Albus with all the fury in his bones. "Look what you've done." The thought was absurd. He had no paper, no quill, no owl, no wand, no name that could be used without inviting chains. Yet he needed Albus. He did not want to admit it, but the truth pressed against him. Albus was the only wizard in Britain with enough power, political, magical, and moral, to alter the shape of Sirius' fate. If Sirius wanted to be more than a shadow haunting Harry's childhood, he needed the truth to be seen. Truth required proof. Proof required Peter. Sirius' stomach twisted, a different kind of hunger. Peter Pettigrew had vanished the night Sirius was arrested. The Ministry had accepted the story because it was easy. The faithful friend had been a traitor. The traitor had killed innocents and laughed about it. They had not looked deeper. Why would they? They were exhausted and terrified and desperate to feel the war had ended cleanly. Sirius had thought Peter dead for months after. Thought he'd blown himself apart like the coward he was. Only later, only in the endless grinding of Azkaban, had doubt become a persistent itch. Peter had always been good at slipping away. Peter had always survived by being small. If Peter lived, he lived hidden. Hidden meant disguise. An animagus form. A rat, perhaps. A creature no one noticed. A creature that could live in walls, in barns, in homes. Sirius stared at the park's damp grass. His mind reached outward, trying to map possibilities. Wizarding families. Old friends. Places Peter might go. Places Peter might hide. The Weasleys came to mind unexpectedly. An image of a red-haired boy in the leaky cauldron years ago, laughing, trailing siblings. Arthur Weasley's kind face. Molly's warm, stern eyes. The sort of family Peter would have envied and exploited. The sort of family who might take in a lost pet without question. It was a thread, thin as cobweb. Not enough to chase yet. Not enough to risk everything on. But it was something. Sirius' body sagged with exhaustion. He had escaped a fortress and crossed a sea, and walked through London's filth and found Harry, only to realize he could not touch him. The weight of it nearly crushed him. He sank to his knees under the oak, cloak pooling around him like spilled darkness. For a moment he let his forehead rest against the bark. He breathed. He tasted rain and earth. He did not pray. He had never been good at it. But he made a vow anyway, because vows were one of the few things that still meant something. "I will not leave you, Harry," he thought. "Even if you never know I'm here." The vow steadied him. Not because it solved anything, but because it gave his suffering a direction. Direction made pain bearable. He stood again, joints aching, and began to walk back toward the street, toward the world where wizards hid behind brick walls and pretended they were safe. He needed food. He needed information. He needed allies, if any could be trusted. And he needed to become, for the first time since Azkaban swallowed him, more than a survivor. He found a cafe that opened early, a narrow place that smelled of frying oil and old coffee. The woman behind the counter barely looked at him. Perhaps she saw only another broken man of the city's edges. Sirius paid with a handful of coins he had stolen from a pocket left unattended on a bus. The theft tasted bitter, but hunger was sharper. The tea was hot enough to hurt his tongue. He welcomed the pain. It reminded him he was still inside his body. He sat near the window, where he could see the street without being seen too clearly. Commuters hurried past, heads down, collars up against the cold. They lived in a world that did not know about spells or curses or dark lords. They worried about rent, about weather, about arguments with wives. Sirius envied them with a sudden, surprising ferocity. He unfolded a small newspaper left on a chair. Muggle news meant little, but he read anyway, because it filled time and distracted the mind from the relentless pull of grief. Words about strikes, about politics, about some distant war. Names of men in suits. Numbers. All of it felt absurdly calm. In the corner of the paper was a story about an escaped prisoner, a man who had fled from a high-security facility. A grainy photo. A description. Not him. Different face. Different crime. Yet the word escaped made Sirius' pulse jump. He folded the paper and stared at his tea. It trembled slightly in his hands. How long until the wizarding world knew? How long until Azkaban's bell had become a howl across the ministry? He could not assume he had time. He had to move quickly, but quickly without stupidity. He had to plan like a man with something to lose. The thought of loss brought Harry's face back, and Sirius' chest tightened. He pushed it aside gently, like you pushed aside a wound so you could tie it later. He left the cafe and walked to a nearby phone box, then stopped, feeling foolish. There was no number he could call, no one to speak to. The people he had trusted most were either dead, imprisoned, or believed him dead inside his own skin. He needed the wizarding world again. He needed Diagon Alley, the ministry, Hogwarts, the beating heart of it all. He could not walk into those places and expect to survive. Yet he could slip along the edges. He could listen. He could steal information the way he had stolen bread. He returned to London by late morning and hovered near Charing Cross Road, watching the flow of wizards into the leaky cauldron. He shifted to the dog again, slipped inside, warmed himself near the hearth and listened. The talk had changed. It was no longer about post-war trials and the price of dragon liver. It was about a missing prisoner. "They're saying the cell was empty," a man murmured, leaning close to his companion. "No sign of forced entry." "Impossible," the companion replied, voice tight. "The Dementors. The Dementors don't care if a prisoner leaves," the first snapped. "They care about feeding. If it's true, if someone got out, Crouch will lose his mind." A thin chill crawled over Sirius' skin, even in dog form. So they knew. Or at least they suspected. The bell had rung, and the ministry had heard. He listened harder. "Who?" the companion asked. The first man lowered his voice further. "You'll laugh. That black fellow. The one who murdered all those people when the Dark Lord fell. Been rotting in there since. Nurturba." Sirius' heart seemed to stop. Even as a dog, the name hit like a fist. Black. Murderer. The story was still intact, still sharp. The companion did laugh, soft and nervous. "You're joking." "I wish I were. My cousin works in magical law enforcement. Says they put every oar on it. Alistair's involved." Alistair. The name carried a weight of its own. Alistair Moody. The man who hunted dark wizards like a wolf. Sirius had seen him once or twice in wartime. Eyes like broken glass. Scars like a map of battles survived. If Alistair was on the hunt, Sirius' freedom would be measured in hours, not days. Sirius pressed himself flatter to the floor, ears back. The pub's warmth felt suddenly dangerous, as if it could betray him. He needed to leave. He needed to disappear. But disappearing did not help Harry. It did not clear his name. It did not bring justice. The idea of justice, in this world, was fragile. Men like Barty believed in it the way they believed in punishment. Men like Alistair believed in it the way they believed in necessity. Albus believed in it the way he believed in long games and sacrifices. Sirius believed in it the way he believed in his own innocence, as a truth that existed regardless of whether anyone acknowledged it. He left the leaky cauldron that afternoon, slipping out while a group of witches argued loudly near the door. In the alley, he shifted back and pulled his hood up, his face hidden in shadow. Now the hunt had begun. And in the hunt, he would have to choose what kind of man he was going to be. The Ministry of Magic did not sleep well even in peace, and in the wake of the war it slept like a man with a knife under his pillow. When the report came from Azkaban, delivered by shaking hands, ink smudged with panic, it moved through the ministry like poison through water. Millicent sat at the head of the long table with her back straight and her fingers interlaced. Her hair was pinned severely. Her face held the careful composure of someone who knew the cost of public uncertainty. Ministers did not have the luxury of looking afraid. Barty sat to her right, jaw clenched so tight a muscle ticked in his cheek. He held the report in one hand, crumpling it slightly without seeming to notice. His eyes were hard and bright. Alistair stood near the far end, not quite at attention, and not quite at ease. His posture made it clear he did not trust chairs. One hand rested on the hilt of his wand as if it were a dagger. He had the air of a man who had seen too much of the dark to ever believe fully in light again. "This is a humiliation," Barty said, voice flat with controlled fury. 2 years of boasting about our security, and now, this. Black escapes without so much as a broken lock. Millicent's lips tightened. "It isn't the time for pride. It's the time for containment." "You're treating it like a public relations issue," Barty snapped. "It's a threat. If Black is out, he'll kill again." Alistair's good eye flicked toward Barty. "He'll try," he said quietly. "If he's half the monster they've painted, he'll go for blood. If he's not, if he's something else, he'll be harder to predict." Millicent looked at Alistair. "What does that mean?" "It means," Alistair replied, "that people who have been in Azkaban don't come out sane. They come out hungry. Sometimes the hunger is for revenge. Sometimes it's for silence. Sometimes it's for something you can't see coming until it's already in your throat." A clerk in the corner swallowed nervously. Quills scratched. The room smelled of wax and paper and the faint acidic tang of fear. Millicent's gaze hardened. "We will not let panic spread. Not after everything. Alistair, you'll lead the search. Quietly at first. If we must go public, we go with certainty." "Barty, I want every Auror mobilized," Barty cut in. "Everyone. He's a murderer. He betrayed the Potters. He killed 12 muggles in the street." He laughed. "That was witnessed." Alistair's face remained unreadable, but his jaw tightened. "Witnesses see what they expect," he said. "Still, the street is real. The bodies were real. We'll find him." Millicent held up a hand, silencing any further argument. "We do this clean. We do this fast. And we do not allow rumors to become riots. There are still families who wake from nightmares with the dark mark burning behind their eyes. They need to believe we have control." "Nay." Barty's fingers tightened on the parchment. "Control," he repeated, as if tasting the word with contempt. Millicent leaned forward. "You're angry," she said softly. "So am I. But anger doesn't catch a man who can turn into a dog and slip through the cracks of the world." Alistair's head tilted slightly. "We'll use the cracks," he said. "We'll watch the places he can't help but go." Barty's eyes narrowed. "He'll go to the Potter's boy." The room went still. Millicent's gaze sharpened. "No," she said. "We will not drag that child into this." "He's the symbol," Barty insisted. "If Black wants to finish what he started—" "He started nothing," Millicent snapped, then caught herself, breath steadying. "He is believed to have started nothing, and we have no evidence he knows where the boy is." Alastor's voice was low. "He knows now," he said. "He'll learn. Men like him always do." Millicent closed her eyes for a brief moment, as if gathering herself. When she opened them, she looked older. "Then we reinforce the protections," she said. Quietly, "We speak to Dumbledore." Barty scoffed. "Dumbledore will give us sermons about compassion, and then do whatever he likes behind closed doors." Alastor's gaze flicked to Millicent again. "Dumbledore's warding is strong," he said. "If Black goes near the boy, we'll know." Millicent nodded once. "Then do it," she said. "Find him. Bring him in alive if you can. Dead if you must." The words landed heavy. In the corner, a clerk's quill paused, then continued scratching, recording history in neat lines of ink. In the streets above the ministry, snow began to fall, soft and quiet, covering London in a thin white line. Godric's Hollow was smaller than Sirius expected, as if the world had tried to shrink itself around the memory of what happened there. The village sat nestled among hills and bare trees, smoke curling from chimneys. Snow lay in thin patches like ash. Sirius arrived at dusk, cloak pulled tight, boots soaked through. He had walked much of the way, riding a train part of it, then hitching in lorries when he could, always careful to keep his head down. Apparition was too risky without a wand and without practice. Splinching himself to death in a hedge would be a stupid end. The irony would be unbearable. He slipped into the village like a shadow. There were lights in windows and voices behind doors. The ordinary life of people who had learned to live beside tragedy. Sirius' stomach twisted with resentment. How could they laugh here, where James and Lily had died? How could they hang wreaths and complain about weather as if the world had not ended on that night? Then he realized. They laughed because they had to. The world did not pause for grief. It never had. He found the churchyard first, drawn by the quiet. The stones stood crooked, old and worn, names softened by time. Snow dusted their tops. In the center of the yard, a tree spread bare branches like skeletal fingers. He did not know exactly what he was looking for until he saw it. A cluster of candles on the ground near the far wall, their flames trembling. Flowers, wilted and frozen at the edges. A small pile of letters tied with ribbon, left by strangers who wanted to touch the story. Sirius' throat tightened. He approached slowly, as if afraid the sight would vanish. Then he saw the stones behind the offerings. James and Lily, carved into pale granite with dates beneath. And a line he had heard once and never forgotten. The last enemy that shall be destroyed is death. Sirius stared until the words blurred. He sank to his knees in the snow. His hands, ungloved, pressed into the cold earth. The pain anchored him. He did not cry, not at first. Tears felt like something he had spent. But grief did not ask permission. It rose up in him like a tide, breaking against ribs and throat. "I'm sorry," he whispered, the words barely audible in the winter air. "I'm sorry." The candles flickered as wind passed. The flames bent, stubborn. He stayed there until the cold forced him to move, until his muscles began to cramp. When he rose, he turned and looked beyond the churchyard. The cottage lay a short walk away, behind a hedge and a small gate. People had tried to preserve it as a monument, but time and weather did what they always did. The roof sagged. The walls were scarred. The front of it, where the curse had struck, was a jagged wound. Sirius approached with steps that felt like walking toward his own execution. As he drew closer, the magic around the ruins prickled. Old protective enchantments, broken. Curses that had scorched into stone. A place where love had been both shield and target. He stood at the threshold and stared at the hole in the wall. He could see inside. Charred beams, debris, dust. In his mind, he saw the room as it had been. Toys on the floor, a kettle on the stove, James' shoes by the door. He saw Lily turning, wand raised. He saw the flash of green. His fingers dug into his palms until they hurt. He stepped inside. The air smelled of damp ash. Snow drifted in through the broken wall, settling on rubble. Sirius moved through the ruins slowly, touching what remained. A piece of a child's crib splintered. A shard of a picture frame high. Dust that might have been plaster, or might have been the remnants of a life. He crouched near the hearth and found something half buried, a small metal toy, shaped like a broom. He picked it up carefully. It was cold, unyielding. Harry's, he thought. He closed his fist around it, as if holding it could hold time. For a moment, his mind tried to imagine a different path, one where he had stayed, where he had been secret keeper, where the Fidelius had held, where James had lived. The thought was too sharp. It cut deeper than any dementor. He forced himself to breathe. This place was not only grief. It was also evidence. It was proof of what had been lost, and what still mattered. Harry was alive because Lily had stood here and loved fiercely enough to leave a mark even Voldemort could not understand. Sirius turned and left the ruins, the small toy in his pocket like a secret. Outside, the wind had picked up. Snow began to fall again, soft and relentless. As he walked back toward the village, he felt eyes on him. He stiffened, every instinct alert. He turned his head slightly. An old woman stood near a garden gate, wrapped in a shawl. Her hair was white, her face lined. She watched him with a look that was not fear exactly, but recognition. Sirius' heartbeat quickened. He had not seen her in years, yet something in her posture tugged at memory. Bathilda Bagshot stepped forward a fraction, her gaze sharp in the dim light. "Sirius," she said softly, as if tasting the name like an old story. He froze. For a moment, Sirius considered running. The impulse was immediate, animal, sharp. Recognition was danger. Recognition meant questions, and questions meant people, and people meant ministry owls and chains. But Bathilda did not shout. She did not raise a wand. She did not call for help. She simply stood there, a small, fragile figure in the snow, and looked at him with eyes that held too much history. "You shouldn't be here," she said, voice low. Sirius swallowed. His throat felt like sandpaper. "I had to," he managed. Bathilda's gaze flicked to the ruins behind him, then back. "Yes," she murmured. "I suppose you did." There was no accusation in her tone. That unsettled him more than anger would have. "How?" Sirius began, then stopped. "How do you know?" But of course she knew. The village knew everything. Names were whispered in doorways. Stories were told by fires. James and Lily had been loved here. Their deaths had been seen. Their ghosts lived in the village's bones. Bathilda's eyes narrowed slightly. "You look like Azkaban," she said, not unkindly. "It's etched into you." Sirius' jaw clenched. "They don't give you much to eat," he said bitterly. Bathilda's mouth tightened. "No," she agreed. "They don't." Silence stretched. Snow fell softly between them. Sirius' mind raced. He could leave now. He could slip away into the night, back to London's sprawl. But something in Bathilda's calm steadied him, like a hand placed gently on a shaking shoulder. He had been alone so long that even a stranger's measured presence felt like a rope thrown into deep water. "Do you know where he is?" Sirius asked. He did not say Harry's name aloud. He did not trust his voice not to break. Bathilda's gaze softened. "The boy?" she asked, and when Sirius nodded, she sighed. "I know what everyone knows. Muggles. Dumbledore's doing." Sirius flinched at the name. Albus was a man who drew strong reactions. Even in Bathilda's tone there was something like resignation. "Why?" Sirius demanded, unable to keep the anger from his voice. "Why would he?" Bathilda held up a hand. "Because he believes he must," she said quietly. "Because he believes the blood protection matters more than comfort." Sirius' hands clenched. "Comfort," he spat. "He's being raised by people who—" He stopped, because the words he wanted to say were too ugly. Bathilda watched him for a long moment. Then she stepped closer, careful, as if approaching a wounded animal. "Sirius," she said softly, "what are you going to do?" The question was simple. It cracked something open. Sirius stared at the snow-dusted stones of the road. What was he going to do? He had escaped with nothing but rage and grief, and a desperate need to see Harry alive. Now he had seen. Now he had learned that the world had moved on without him. Now the hunt had begun. He had to clear his name. He had to become more than a shadow. He had to protect Harry without destroying the magic that kept him alive. "I need proof," Sirius said finally, voice hoarse. "I need someone to believe me." Bathilda's gaze sharpened. "Believe you about what?" she asked, though something in her expression suggested she already suspected. Sirius hesitated. To speak it aloud felt like stepping off a cliff. Yet he had stepped off worse. He took a breath. "I didn't betray them," he said. "I didn't." His voice cracked. He forced it steady. "It was Peter. He was secret keeper. He's alive." "No, kinda." Bathilda did not laugh. She did not scoff. Her eyes widened slightly, and her hand tightened on her shawl. "Alive," she repeated. "Yes," Sirius said, desperation rising. "He's alive and he's hiding and he's the reason James and Lily—" He could not finish. Bathilda's face went very still. "That's a terrible thing to say," she murmured. Not as condemnation, but as acknowledgement of the weight. "It's true," Sirius insisted. "And I can prove it if I can find him. But I can't do it alone. Not with the Ministry hunting me." "Nah, come." Bathilda looked past him toward the ruins again, as if seeing the past layered on the present. Then she sighed, slow and deep. "There are people who would not believe you even if you laid the truth in their hands," she said. "The Ministry has invested too much in their story. They like villains. Villains make the world feel orderly." "I don't care what they like," Sirius snapped. "I care what's real." Bathilda nodded once. "Then you need someone who cares about what's real more than what's convenient," she said. "Someone with power enough to force eyes open." Sirius' stomach tightened. "Albus," he said, the name tasting like rust. Bathilda's gaze held his. "Yes," she said softly. "Albus." Sirius' laugh was bitter. "He'll have me chained the moment he sees me." Bathilda's expression did not change. "Or he'll listen," she said. "He's a complicated man. He always has been. But he loved James and Lily in his way. He loves the boy. If there is a chance you speak truth, he will want to know." Sirius stared at her. The idea of walking up to Albus Dumbledore like a penitent at a king's hall was almost laughable. Yet the alternative was worse. Running until caught, dying in an alley, leaving Harry alone. Bathilda reached into her pocket and pulled out a small object. A coin, tarnished, worn smooth. She placed it in Sirius' hand. It was warm from her skin. "A portkey," she said quietly. "Not to Hogwarts. I'm not foolish. But to a place where you can think without being seen. Use it if you must." Sirius looked down at the coin, then up at her. "Why?" he asked, voice raw. "Why help me?" Bathilda's gaze flicked to the ruins. "Because they were good," she said. "And because you look like a man who has been punished enough, whether guilty or not." She paused. "And because I don't like the idea of the wrong monster being caged while the real one walks free." Sirius' fingers curled around the coin. It felt heavy as fate. "Be careful," Bathilda added, voice suddenly firm. "If you go after Albus, do it with thought. Don't appear like a beast at his doorstep. He will defend Hogwarts. He will defend the boy. He will defend the world, and if you force him, he will break you." "No." Sirius nodded slowly. Bathilda stepped back into her garden's shadow. "Go," she said softly, "before someone sees you and decides to be brave." Sirius turned away, the coin in his pocket. Snow fell, covering his footprints almost as soon as he made them. As he left Godric's hollow behind, the air felt heavier, not with despair but with purpose. Albus died. Proof. Peter dot. The hunt had begun, and now Sirius would hunt too. Only his prey was not just a man, but a story that had been allowed to harden into a lie. The portkey took him to a place that smelled of peat and old stone, a cottage that had once belonged to someone who left and never returned. It sat on the edge of a moor, alone enough that the wind had no obstacles, and the sky pressed down heavy with cloud. The door hung crooked on its hinges, but it closed. The hearth was intact. There was a stack of dry wood beneath a tarp, as if someone had prepared for a winter that never came. Sirius stared at the place, heart hammering. For a moment he expected a trap, a flash of ministry robes, the cold grin of Alistair Moody. Nothing happened. The cottage remained silent, waiting. He built a fire with hands that fumbled. It took 3 tries, and the frustration of it nearly made him laugh. In the old world he would have flicked his wand and conjured flames without thinking. Now he knelt on the floor like a peasant, striking flint against stone until sparks caught. When the fire finally took, the warmth that spread was so immediate it felt like a miracle. He sat close to it, palms extended, and let the heat seep into him. His clothes smelled of rain and smoke and old sweat. His hair had begun to dry into tangled knots. He must have looked like something out of folklore, a madman of the moors. In the firelight, his thoughts sharpened. Bathilda had given him a rope, but it was still his choice whether to climb or hang. Contacting Albus was dangerous. Albus was not the ministry, but he was not separate from it either. He moved in a world of politics and delicate balances. He could decide Sirius was too risky and end him with a sigh. Sirius needed leverage. Not blackmail, exactly. He was not his mother. But proof enough that Albus would at least hear him before doing anything irreversible. He had no wand. He had no way to produce magical evidence. What he did have were memories, and one physical thing. The small metal broom toy from the ruins. It wasn't proof of betrayal. It was proof of love. Proof Sirius had been there, had touched the past. He needed something else. Something only the Marauders would know. Something that would get Albus' attention without screaming trap. He found paper in a drawer, yellowed and stiff. He found a charcoal stub. He sat at the rough table and stared at the blank space until his hands stopped shaking. He began to write. Not an essay. Not an explanation. Not a plea. Something short, sharp, and impossible to ignore. Albus Dumbledore, he wrote, then paused, because writing the name felt wrong. He swallowed and continued. Padfoot Lives. He stared at the words. In the old days, that would have been a joke, one of their code names scribbled in the margins of a homework parchment. Now it felt like a summoning. He added another line. The secret keeper was not I. His hand trembled. He added the final line, the hook. Ask the rat. He leaned back, breath unsteady. It was a gamble. Albus might not understand. He might think it nonsense. Or he might understand enough to worry, and worry was sometimes more powerful than certainty. Sirius needed a way to deliver the message. Owls were safest, but he had no owl. He could steal one, perhaps, but stealing an owl was more complicated than stealing bread. Owls remembered. They bit. They did not like being treated as tools. There was another option. The wizarding world had cracks, like Azkaban, places where messages passed hand to hand. The Hog's Head, for one. Aberforth had eyes everywhere. He hated Albus, but he knew how to keep secrets. Sirius folded the note carefully, then paused. He did not have an envelope. He did not have a seal. He pricked his finger with a splinter from the table and dabbed a drop of blood onto the fold, pressing it with his thumb. The gesture felt old, like family rituals, like signatures written in pain. He stared at his bleeding finger for a moment, surprised at how bright the blood looked. He had grown used to feeling like a ghost. Blood was inconveniently alive. He wrapped his finger in cloth, stood, and looked around the cottage. He could stay here and hide for a time. The moor was empty. The wind covered tracks. But hiding was not why he had escaped. He stepped outside into the night. Snow crunched under his boots. The sky was dark and heavy. The world smelled of cold earth and smoke from his own small fire rising into the wind. Sirius shifted into the dog again, the note clamped gently in his teeth, and began to run. The moor opened before him like a bleak sea. He ran across it with a speed his human body could not manage, muscles stretching, lungs pulling in air that burned. In the distance, faint, he saw the lights of a village. Beyond that, somewhere, a pub that served as a gathering point for secrets and bitter men. The Hog's Head. If Aberforth refused him, Sirius would find another way. If Aberforth betrayed him, Sirius would die. It was that simple. He had lived too long in a place where you learn to accept such stakes without flinching. He ran until the village lights grew larger, until the smell of smoke and ale reached his nose, until the sound of distant laughter drifted on cold air. Then he slowed, slipping into shadows, because a hunted man did not announce himself. The Hog's Head smelled like spilled beer and wet wool, and things that had been cleaned badly on purpose. It was the sort of place that made respectable wizards wrinkle their noses and pretend they'd never been inside. That made it useful. Sirius slipped in as a dog, shaking snow from his fur. The room was dim, lit by a few candles and a hearth that burned low. Men sat hunched over drinks, their faces half hidden. A pair of witches whispered in a corner. A farmer-looking wizard argued softly with a trader about the price of something that bleated in a sack. Behind the bar, Aberforth stood with arms crossed, watching everything. He was thick-set, beard untrimmed, eyes sharp. He had the look of a man who had stopped caring what anyone thought and become dangerous because of it. Sirius approached the bar slowly, note in his mouth. Aberforth's gaze dropped to him. His expression did not soften. "Out," he said flatly, without moving. "No strays." Sirius stopped. He lowered his head and set the note on the floor. Aberforth stared at it for a moment, then at Sirius. His eyes narrowed. He reached down, snatched the note up, and unfolded it with a frown. His brow furrowed as he read. The frown deepened. He read again. Then his gaze snapped to Sirius, sharp as a hook. "Where did you get this?" Aberforth demanded. Sirius held his gaze. In the dog's eyes, human intelligence stared back. Aberforth's hand tightened around the paper. "You're not..." He cut himself off, as if the thought was too absurd to finish. His eyes scanned the room quickly, assessing who was watching. A man at a table glanced over, curiosity mild. Aberforth barked, "What are you staring at?" The man looked away immediately. Aberforth leaned down, close enough that Sirius could smell onions on his breath. "If this is a joke," he murmured, voice low, "it's a poor one." Sirius shifted, quickly, in the shadow of the bar where the candlelight didn't reach well. Bones flowed, fur receded. In a blink he was a man again, gaunt and ragged, crouched close to the floor like he might spring away. The note's words were now in Aberforth's hand, and Sirius' eyes were wild but focused. Aberforth stiffened. His hand went to his wand under the bar. "Bloody," he hissed. "Don't," Sirius rasped. His voice was hoarse, unused. "I'm not here to fight you." Aberforth's eyes widened slightly, then narrowed again. Recognition crawled into his expression like a slow stain. "Black," he said, voice full of disgust and disbelief. Sirius flinched at the surname, but he did not correct him. He had used it himself in his mind, like a curse. "You should be in Azkaban," Aberforth said. "I was," Sirius replied. "I left." Aberforth's laugh was short and humorless. "You don't leave Azkaban." Sirius' gaze hardened. "I did." Silence pressed. The room's low noise continued. Murmurs, clinks, a cough. But around the bar, something tighter formed. Aberforth studied Sirius' face, his hollow cheeks, his haunted eyes. "You look like death," he said, as if that mattered. "Death would have been easier," Sirius replied, then regretted the honesty. He forced himself to focus. "I need a message delivered. To Albus." Aberforth's jaw tightened. "Albus isn't a post office." Sirius swallowed. "Tell him," he said carefully, "that Padfoot lives. Tell him the secret keeper wasn't me. Tell him—" His voice hitched. He forced it steady. "Tell him to ask the rat." Aberforth's eyes narrowed. "The rat," he repeated, slow. Sirius nodded. "He'll understand. Or he'll ask someone who will." Aberforth leaned back, eyes flicking over Sirius again. "And what do I get for risking my neck?" he asked. Sirius' mouth twisted. "Satisfaction," he said bitterly. "At doing the right thing for once." Aberforth snorted. "You've come to the wrong man." Sirius' hand twitched toward his pocket where the small metal broom sat like a talisman. "James and Lily are dead," he said, voice low. "Harry's alive. And he's with muggles who—" He stopped, jaw tight. "If you care about that at all, you'll pass the message." Aberforth's gaze sharpened at the names. Whatever else he felt about Sirius, he felt something about the Potters. Everyone did. They were a wound in the wizarding world's pride and a bandage on its fear. Aberforth's mouth tightened. He looked away, jaw working. For a moment Sirius thought he might refuse. Then Aberforth swore under his breath. "Fine," he said. "Fine. You. I'll pass it. But if this ends with horrors kicking down my door, I'll feed you to the goats myself. Now." Sirius' lips twitched, almost a smile, though it felt foreign. "Fair," he murmured. Aberforth leaned in again. "You'll go," he said. "Now, out the back. Don't bring your stench of trouble into my place longer than you have to." Sirius nodded once. He shifted back into the dog, quicker now, and slipped behind the bar through a narrow door into a back alley that smelled of refuse and snow. Outside, the cold hit him again. He ran. Behind him, inside the hogshead, Aberforth stood with a scrap of paper that might change the shape of a war's aftermath. He would deliver it because he had said he would, and because even bitter men had lines they did not cross. Sirius ran into the night with a strange, fragile thing in his chest. Hope. Albus received the message at night, when Hogwarts was quiet enough that the castle's own breathing could be heard in the creak of beams and the distant drip of melting snow from gargoyles. He sat in his study with a cup of tea gone cold beside him, reading a report from the ministry with a tired patience. Another list of names. Another argument about dementors. Another plea for reassurance. Fawkes dozed on his perch, feathers glowing faintly in the firelight. When the knock came, soft, discreet, Albus looked up. "Enter," he said. Minerva stepped in, her tartan robes neat even at this hour, her hair in its bun, her eyes sharp. "A message," she said, tone clipped. "From the village? The Hog's Head?" Albus's eyebrows lifted. Messages from the Hog's Head at midnight rarely meant anything good. Minerva handed him a scrap of parchment. "Aberforth wouldn't say more," she added, as if that alone was a source of irritation. Albus unfolded it. "Padfoot lives. The secret keeper was not I. Ask the rat?" For a long moment he stared. His eyes did not move. The only sound was the soft crackle of fire and the faint ticking of some silver instrument on his desk. Minerva watched him, her suspicion deepening. "What is it?" she asked. Albus's fingers tightened on the parchment. Very slowly, he lifted his gaze. In the firelight, his eyes looked older than usual, as if the words had dragged years out of him. "It appears," he said softly, "that Sirius has escaped." Minerva's face went very still. "Escaped," she repeated, as if testing whether the word could be real. Albus nodded once, though his mind was moving quickly now, turning the message over like a stone in a river. Padfoot, die. One of the old nicknames he recalled, from whispered stories of mischief, from Remus's reluctant admissions, from the way James' eyes had lit when speaking of friendships that felt like invincibility. "The secret keeper was not I," Minerva read aloud, then looked up sharply. "He's claiming innocence." "He is claiming more than that," Albus murmured, eyes on the last line. "Ask the rat." Minerva's mouth tightened. "What does that mean?" she demanded. "This is nonsense." Albus did not answer immediately. He rose and walked to the window, looking out at the dark grounds. Snow lay pale under moonlight. The forbidden forest was a black mass at the edge of sight. Somewhere out there, centaurs watched. Somewhere else, dangers slept. Ask the rat. Albus's mind leapt to the night James and Lily died, to the frantic hours afterward, to Hagrid carrying Harry, to Sirius arriving, wild-eyed and desperate. He remembered Sirius's anguish, his insistence on giving Hagrid the motorbike, his words, "Take him. Take him to Albus. I'll go after Peter." Albus had believed Sirius guilty because the evidence had been neat, and because in the chaos of grief, neat evidence felt like a mercy. He had doubted briefly, but doubt had been drowned by ministry certainty and the weight of bodies in the street. "Ask the rat." "Minerva," Albus said quietly, "do you recall, did anyone ever recover Peter's body?" Minerva frowned. "Peter Pettigrew?" she asked, confusion flickering. "No. They said there was nothing left of him. Just a finger." Albus's stomach tightened. Minerva's eyes widened slightly as she followed his thought. "You're not suggesting." "I am suggesting nothing," Albus said, voice gentle but firm. "I am considering." Minerva's hands clenched. "Sirius is a murderer," she said, as if repeating it could keep the world stable. "He killed those people. He was seen," Albus agreed softly. "He was heard. He was laughing." Minerva's mouth tightened. Albus turned back to his desk and placed the parchment down as if it were fragile. "It is possible," he said slowly, "that Sirius is exactly what the ministry believes. It is also possible that he is not." Minerva stared at him. "And if he is not," she said, voice low, "then we have been complicit in condemning an innocent man to Azkaban." Albus's eyes closed briefly. "Yes," he said. The silence that followed was heavy. Minerva swallowed. "What do you intend to do?" Albus opened his eyes. The gentleness remained, but beneath it was steel. "I intend," he said, "to find Sirius before the ministry does. I intend to speak to him. And I intend to ask the rat." Minerva's expression sharpened. "This is madness," she said. "If he is guilty, then I will do what must be done," Albus replied. "But I will not let the ministry handle this without scrutiny. Their certainty has been expensive." Minerva hesitated, then nodded once, reluctantly. "How?" she asked. "How do you find a man who can turn into a dog and has a decade's worth of desperation in him?" Albus's gaze drifted to Fawkes. The phoenix stirred, eyes bright. "Hope," Albus said softly. "Sometimes hope brings people to you." He sat again, fingers steepled, and began to plan. Not with the frantic urgency of a young man, but with the careful precision of someone who had spent a lifetime playing games with darker forces than bureaucrats. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering the world in white. In Surrey, a small boy slept in a cupboard under the stairs, dreaming of flying without knowing why. And somewhere in the night, a gaunt man ran with the desperation of someone who had finally found a thread to pull. Sirius did not go to Hogwarts because it was safe. He went because it was inevitable. If Albus wanted to find him, Hogwarts would be the place the search began and ended. It was the heart of Albus's power, the seat from which he watched the wizarding world with eyes that seemed to see too much. It was also the one place Sirius had never truly hated, even when he hated everything else. Hogwarts had been his first taste of freedom from the Black House. It had been where he learned what he could be. Now it was a fortress of his enemy and his only hope. He approached at night, skirting the edges of Hogsmeade, keeping to shadows. The village was quiet, snow muffling sound. Lights glowed faintly in windows. The 3 broomsticks stood warm and inviting. He avoided it. Too many eyes. Too many familiar faces. He moved beyond the village, into the dark slope that led toward the castle grounds. The air here was different, cleaner, sharper. Magic saturated it like fog, old and layered. Hogwarts's wards pressed against his skin, not hostile exactly, but alert. Sirius crouched in a hedge near the edge of the grounds and stared at the castle. In the moonlight, it looked like something out of legend, towers rising like spears, windows glowing with warm light. The lake lay black beside it, mist curling over its surface. Somewhere out there, the giant squid moved in slow darkness. The forbidden forest loomed beyond, a wall of shadow. He could not cross the grounds without being noticed. Even as a dog, the castle's protections would sense him, perhaps. Albus would certainly sense him if he came too close. That was the point. Perhaps, yet Sirius did not want Aurors to sense him. He did not want Alistair's net closing. He needed to choose the moment. He needed to control the meeting as much as possible. A surprise appearance at the castle gates would end with spells flying. Sirius' nerves were frayed. Albus's responsibility was immense. The risk of misunderstanding was too high. So Sirius waited. He stayed hidden through the night, cold seeping in, listening to the castle's distant sounds. A door opening somewhere, footsteps on stone, a muffled laugh. The life of Hogwarts continued, unaware of the shadow watching from the hedge. At dawn, as the sky lightened into pale gray, Sirius shifted into the dog and moved along the edge of the grounds, following the line of the forest. He found a place where the trees crept close to the ward boundary, where shadows deepened and the ground dipped. There, he waited again. Hours passed. The cold made his muscles ache. Hunger gnawed. Yet he stayed. He had waited 2 years in Azkaban. Waiting here was almost easy by comparison. Near midday, the castle doors opened and figures emerged. Students in cloaks, laughing, heading toward the lake. Sirius tensed, instinct sharp. Children were unpredictable. They screamed. They pointed. They ran toward trouble. He kept still. Then, among the students, a tall figure in dark green robes walked with measured steps. Minerva McGonagall. Sirius recognized her instantly, even in the distance. Her posture was unmistakable, straight-backed, severe, as if she could shame the world into behaving. She stopped near the edge of the lake, watching the students with a guarded expression. For a moment she seemed to look toward the forest, eyes narrowing, as if she sensed something. Sirius' heart hammered. He resisted the urge to move. Minerva turned away, continuing along the shore. Sirius let out a slow breath. If Minerva could sense him from here, then the castle's wards were already whispering his presence. That meant Albus likely knew, or would soon. The question was whether Albus would come alone, or whether he would bring the ministry. Sirius remained in the forest shadow as the day turned toward afternoon. When the sun began to sink and the students returned inside, the grounds grew quiet again. The lake mist thickened. The sky turned a bruised purple. Sirius' ears pricked at the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, alone. A figure moved along the path near the forest edge. Not a student, not a teacher in a hurry. The gate was familiar in its calm. Albus Dumbledore approached the forest boundary with his hands clasped behind his back, as if taking an evening stroll. Sirius' stomach clenched. He forced himself to remain still. He watched Albus stop near a tree, gaze lifting toward the branches, as if admiring the way leaves held snow. Then Albus spoke, voice carrying softly into the shadows. "It is cold to be waiting in hedgerows," he said. "Even for a dog." Sirius' breath caught. Albus's eyes, sharp even from this distance, turned toward the exact place Sirius hid. "I would prefer," Albus continued gently, "that we speak as men." Sirius stepped out of the shadows, human again, cloak hanging off him like a rag. His face was pale. His eyes were too bright. He held himself tense, ready to bolt. Albus regarded him with an expression that was not fear, not anger, but something like sorrow edged with caution. "Hello, Sirius," Albus said softly. Sirius' throat tightened. For a heartbeat he could not speak. Then the words tore free, raw jeeb-jew. "You left him with them," he rasped. "With muggles who—" Albus's gaze sharpened. "I did," he said. "And I would like to know why you are alive to accuse me." Sirius laughed once, bitter. "Because I didn't die," he said. "Because I didn't deserve Azkaban." Albus' eyes did not leave him. "That is quite a claim," he said. Sirius' hands clenched. "Ask the rat," he said, voice low and fierce. Albus's expression shifted, subtle but unmistakable. "Yes," he murmured. "About that." The air between them thickened with the weight of unspoken things. Albus did not draw his wand, but the lack of movement was not absence of threat. It was a choice. Sirius could feel power in the air around him, controlled and immense, like a storm held behind glass. Sirius, for his part, had no wand to draw. He felt naked without it, as if his hands were suddenly useless. Yet he had been without it for 2 years. He had survived with teeth and claws and stubbornness. He had survived with his mind. He stepped forward a fraction, then stopped. The ward boundary prickled. The forest behind him seemed to lean in, listening. Albus studied him. "You are thinner than you ought to be," he observed quietly. Sirius' lips curled. "Azkaban isn't known for hospitality." Albus's gaze flicked briefly, as if the word Azkaban carried physical weight. "No," he agreed. "It is not." Sirius' anger flared again. "Then why did you let them do it?" he demanded. "Why did you let them throw me in there without a trial? Without—" His voice broke. He forced it steady. "Without proof." Albus's eyes were steady. "Because there was proof," he said softly. "Or what appeared to be proof. 12 dead muggles. Peter's finger. Witnesses. Your own reaction." "My. Sirius' laugh was ragged. "My reaction," he repeated. "You mean the part where I sat in the street and laughed because my best friend was dead, and my other best friend was dead, and I realized the rat had fooled all of us?" Albus's gaze did not flinch. "Yes," he said. "That part." Sirius' hands shook. He clenched them, nails biting into palms. "I went after him," he said. "I went after Peter. I told Hagrid to take Harry. His voice hitched. "I was supposed to keep them safe." Albus's expression softened for a heartbeat. "You were," he said gently. Sirius swallowed hard. "And I didn't," he whispered. Silence fell. In the distance, an owl hooted. The lake's mist curled. The castle's lights flickered. Albus spoke again, voice quiet. "Sirius," he said, "tell me why you believe Peter is alive." Sirius' eyes sharpened. "Because he's a coward," he said. "Because he's small. Because he always hid behind us and let us take the blows. Because there was no body. Because it was too neat. And because—" He paused, jaw tight. "Because I know him." Albus nodded slowly. "You have not seen him," he said. Sirius' stomach tightened. "No," he admitted. "Not yet." Albus's gaze grew heavier. "Then your claim is instinct." Sirius' anger surged. "It's truth," he snapped. "Even if I can't put it in a pretty box for the Wisengamot." Albus's eyes narrowed slightly. "Truth without proof is difficult to wield," he said, "especially against a story the world has chosen." Sirius stepped closer, voice fierce. "Then help me," he said. "You're good at stories. You're good at making people listen. Help me find him." Albus was silent for a long moment. Snow began to fall again, soft flakes drifting between them. Finally, Albus sighed, a sound like old weariness. "If I help you," he said, "I must be certain I am not unleashing a danger greater than the one we have already endured." Sirius' lips curled bitterly. "You think I'm dangerous?" Albus's gaze held his. "I think you are wounded," he said quietly. "And wounded men can be dangerous, especially when they believe they have nothing left to lose." Sirius' throat tightened. He wanted to deny it. He wanted to say he had everything to lose. Harry, Dot, his own name, the possibility of being something other than a monster. But Albus was right in a way that hurt. Sirius had been chewed by Azkaban. He could feel the prison's teeth marks in his mind. He could feel how close he was to snapping. Albus took a step forward, closing some of the distance, though still not close enough to be within reach. "Let me see," he said softly. Sirius stiffened. "Legitimacy," he said, suspicion sharp. Albus nodded. "Yes," he said simply. Sirius' stomach churned. The thought of someone walking through his mind was unbearable. The prison had already stripped him bare enough. Yet he understood the necessity. If he wanted Albus's help, he had to give something. "You won't like what you find," Sirius said hoarsely. "I have not made a habit of liking the truths I must face," Albus replied. Sirius swallowed hard. He nodded once. Albus lifted a hand, not drawing his wand, not speaking any incantation, and Sirius felt the gentle, inexorable pressure of magic against his thoughts. It was not a shove. It was a door opening. Memories surged. James's laugh. Lily's smile. The motorbike's roar. The night of the Fidelius. Sirius arguing, insisting Peter be secret keeper, believing it clever. Peter's nervous eyes. The night of the attack. Sirius arriving too late, collapsing in ruins. The street. Peter screaming accusations, pointing, then green light and explosion and laughter tearing out of Sirius because his mind had shattered. Azkaban. Cold. Dementors. Hunger. The moment of escape. Harry at the stairs, small and pale. Sirius' eyes burned. He tried to hold his mind steady, but it shook under the weight of everything. Albus's face remained calm, but his eyes changed as he moved through Sirius' memories. Something like pain flickered. Something like regret. When the pressure withdrew, Sirius swayed slightly, breathing hard as if he had run for miles. Albus's voice was quiet. "You did not betray them," he said. Sirius stared at him, chest heaving. "No," he whispered. Albus's gaze sharpened. "And you believe Peter lives," he said, tone thoughtful. Sirius' hands trembled. "Yes," he said. "I do." Albus was silent for a long moment. Then he said, very softly, "Then we must find him." Sirius' breath caught. For a heartbeat he could not believe the words. Hope surged so fast it was almost painful. Albus held up a hand before Sirius could speak. "But you must understand," he said, voice firm now. "We cannot do this rashly. The Ministry hunts you. If they catch you, you will not survive a second time. And if they catch you before we have proof, your story will be buried." Sirius' jaw clenched. "So what do we do?" he demanded. Albus's gaze turned toward the castle lights. "We move carefully," he said. "We find your rat, and we do it in a way that does not alert those who would prefer the lie." Sirius' mind raced. "The Weasleys," he said suddenly, the thought that had haunted him in the park returning. If he's hiding, he'd pick. Albus's eyes narrowed, as if considering. Arthur's family, he murmured. Yes, they are generous. Sirius' throat tightened. I don't want to hurt them, he said quickly. They've done nothing, but if he's there… Albus nodded. We will not harm them, he said. We will approach them with care, and we will do something else too. His gaze returned to Sirius. We will ensure Harry is not left entirely alone. Sirius' breath hitched. You'll take him out of that house, he demanded, hope and fear twisting together. Albus' expression was sorrowful. Not yet, he said. The blood protection is not simply tradition, Sirius. It is a shield Voldemort cannot easily pierce, should he ever return. Sirius' anger flared. He's gone, he snapped. He's dead. Albus' eyes were very gentle and very sad. I do not believe he is gone forever, he said. The words hung like a shadow. Sirius swallowed hard. The idea of Voldemort returning making the world tilt. Yet even if Albus was right, Harry's misery was real now, not hypothetical. Albus continued, voice firm. But we can do something. We can watch. We can intervene without breaking the enchantment. We can ensure the boy is cared for in ways Petunia cannot be trusted to provide. Sirius' hands clenched. I'll do it, he said fiercely. I'll watch. I'll protect him. Albus held his gaze. And you will not act out of anger, he said quietly. You will not kill the wrong man in the wrong moment, and give the Ministry everything they want. Sirius' mouth tightened. He wanted to protest. He wanted to say he had control. But he remembered the way rage had almost made him storm Privet Drive. He nodded once, stiff. Albus stepped back slightly, as if easing the tension. I will contact Arthur, he said. Quietly. I will arrange a meeting. Meanwhile, you must disappear. Not forever, but for now. There are places even Alastor's eye does not easily reach. Sirius' stomach tightened at the name. He'll find me, he said. Albus's gaze was steady. Not if you allow yourself to be guided, he said. Trust me, Sirius. Trust. The word tasted like a bitter potion. Sirius looked at Albus, at the old man's calm, at the weight in his eyes, at the way the world seemed to arrange itself around him. Sirius did not trust easily anymore. But he did not have the luxury of pride. He nodded again, slower. All right, he said hoarsely. Tell me where. Albus's expression softened. Come, he said. There is a place where you may rest, and eat, and begin to become yourself again. Sirius followed him into the shadows with a strange sense of stepping onto a bridge that might collapse under his feet. But it was a bridge, and for now, that was enough. The place Albus brought him to was not Hogwarts, and not the Ministry, and not any house Sirius had ever known. It was a small stone building tucked into a fold of land where the forest thickened, and the air smelled of pine and damp earth. It was warded, subtly, the sort of warding that did not shout its presence but sat like a patient sentinel. Inside, the room was plain. A bed with rough blankets, a table, a chair, a bowl of stew steaming, its scent thick and rich. Sirius stared at it as if it might vanish. He ate, Albus said gently. Sirius hesitated, then sat at the table. His hands shook so badly he nearly spilled the bowl. He brought the spoon to his mouth and swallowed. Heat spread through him, shockingly intense. His stomach cramped, protesting. He ate anyway, slowly, forcing himself not to inhale it like an animal. Albus stood near the hearth, hands clasped behind his back, watching without intrusion. The old man's presence filled the small space, not in a domineering way, but in the way a mountain filled the horizon. You did not ignore it. You navigated around it. When Sirius finished half the bowl, he set the spoon down, breathing hard. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cold. I can't, he rasped. Albus nodded. Your body has been starved, he said softly. We will be patient. Sirius laughed bitterly. Patience, he muttered. I had plenty of that in Azkaban. Albus's gaze held him. Then you have a skill most men lack, he said. Sirius' mouth twisted. He wanted to spit at the compliment. Yet a small part of him, buried deep under bitterness, felt something like acknowledgement. He had survived. That meant something, even if it had cost him. Albus moved closer and sat across from him, folding his hands on the table. Sirius, he said quietly, I owe you an apology. Sirius stared at him, startled despite himself. He had expected lectures, not apologies. Albus's eyes were tired. I should have insisted on a trial, he said. I should have questioned the neatness of the story. I did not. I allowed grief and exhaustion to make me careless. Sirius' throat tightened. A part of him wanted to scream, to accuse, to pour years of suffering onto the table like blood. Another part of him was too tired for that. The apology did not erase Azkaban. Nothing could. But it was a crack in the wall of certainty, and cracks were how light entered. Sirius swallowed hard. I don't want your apology, he said roughly. I want Peter. Albus nodded once. Yes, he said. And to get him, we must be clever. Sirius' gaze sharpened, hungry. Tell me. Albus's fingers steepled. Arthur Weasley is not a man who enjoys secrets, he said. But he will keep one if it protects his family. I will invite him to Hogwarts on the pretense of discussing certain post-war security measures. When he is here, we will ask his children's pets. Sirius' mouth tightened. The idea of dragging the Weasleys into this made guilt twist in him. Yet if Peter was there, they were already involved, unknowingly. And if Peter isn't there? Sirius asked. Albus's gaze was steady. Then we look elsewhere, he said. We widen the search. We do not make enemies unnecessarily. Sirius rubbed a hand over his face, feeling stubble. He'll run, he said. If he senses anything, he'll vanish like smoke. Albus nodded. Yes, he said. That is why we must trap him without revealing the trap. Sirius' mind raced. He's an animagus, he said. If he's a rat, if he's small, he could slip away. Albus's eyes flicked to him. You are also an animagus, he pointed out gently. Sirius' mouth twisted. I'm not small, he muttered. Albus's lips quirked faintly. It was almost a smile, brief and strange in this grim context. No, he agreed. You are not. Sirius looked down at his hands, thin and scarred. What happens after? He asked quietly. If we prove it, if we show the ministry, what happens? Albus's gaze grew heavier. There will be consequences, he said. For the ministry. For Barty. For those who were eager to see you condemned. They will resist. They will claim the evidence is forged. They will try to keep the story intact, because their pride depends on it. Sirius' jaw clenched. And Harry? He asked. Albus's eyes softened. Harry, he said softly, will still need protection. He will still need care. If you are exonerated, you will have a chance to be part of his life. It will not be simple. The blood protection will still bind him to Petunia for some time. But there are ways to soften the edges without breaking the spell. Sirius' throat tightened. He deserves better, he whispered. Albus nodded. Yes, he said. He does. Sirius stared at the stew, now cooling. He felt exhaustion pulling at him, heavy as chains. Yet beneath the exhaustion was something new, a path, a plan, a chance. I want to see him, Sirius said, voice rough. Not just through a window. I want him to know. Albus's gaze was firm. Not yet, he said gently. Not until we have cleared your name. If you approach him now, you endanger him. The ministry would use him as bait. They would not be kind. Sirius' hands clenched. He hated that Albus was right. He leaned back in the chair, eyes closing briefly. When he opened them, his voice was quieter. "All right," he said. "Tell me what to do." Albus stood. "Rest," he said. "Eat what you can. Sleep. Tomorrow we begin." Sirius nodded, throat too tight for words. Albus paused at the door. "And Sirius," he added softly. Sirius looked up. Albus's eyes held his. "You have carried this alone for too long," he said. "For now, allow someone else to carry some of it with you." Sirius swallowed hard, then gave a single stiff nod. Albus left, closing the door quietly behind him. Sirius sat in the candlelit room, listening to the wind outside. For the first time since Azkaban, he ate without watching over his shoulder every second. For the first time, he lay down on a bed and did not feel stone beneath him. Sleep came quickly, heavy and deep. And for once, his dreams did not end only in green light. For once, they held a glimpse of a small boy's face and the possibility, faint, fragile, of laughter returning. Next day, Hogwarts wore winter-like armor. Snow clung to stone ledges and piled in corners where the wind could not reach. The castle's corridors were warm but smelled faintly of damp wool as students stamped snow from boots and complained about cold in the way children always had. Arthur Weasley arrived just after noon, escorted by a staff member to Albus' office. He looked tired, his hair more mussed than usual, his cheeks red from cold. Yet his eyes were bright with curiosity. Arthur had always had that look, the look of a man who found wonder in the world even when the world insisted on being grim. Minerva stood near the office door, arms crossed. Her gaze flicked over Arthur, then toward Albus with silent question. Albus nodded slightly. Arthur stepped inside, rubbing his hands. "Professor," he said warmly. "Or headmaster, I suppose. It still feels odd calling you that after all these years." Albus smiled gently. "Arthur," he said, "thank you for coming on such short notice." Arthur's expression grew more serious. "Ministry business?" he asked, lowering his voice. "In a sense," Albus replied. "Please, sit." Arthur sat in the chair across from Albus' desk. His gaze wandered briefly to the silver instruments, the spinning, whirring objects that made the office feel like a scholar's laboratory. He looked as if he wanted to ask what they did. He restrained himself. That restraint alone told Albus how worried he was. Albus poured tea and slid a cup toward Arthur. "How is your family?" he asked softly. Arthur's face softened. "Tired," he admitted, "but safe. Molly's been, well, you know Molly. She keeps the house running like a fortress." A shadow flickered. "The children are young enough that the war feels like a story for them, but—" He shook his head. "We all wake up sometimes." Albus nodded. "Yes," he said quietly. "We do." Minerva's gaze remained sharp, guarded. Arthur glanced at her, then back to Albus. "What's happened?" he asked, voice low now. Albus leaned forward slightly. "Arthur," he said, "I need you to answer a question, and I need you to answer it carefully. There is a matter of concealed identity." Arthur blinked. "Concealed identity," he repeated. Albus's eyes held his. "Do any of your children keep pets?" he asked. Arthur frowned, confusion flickering. "Pets?" he asked. "Well, yes. Percy has a rat, I think. Had it for ages. And the twins, Merlin knows what I've got hidden. Why?" Minerva's hands tightened on her arms. Arthur's brow furrowed deeper as he noticed the tension. "Albus," he said slowly, "what is this about?" Albus's voice softened. "There is a possibility," he said, choosing each word with care, "that someone has been hiding in plain sight. Someone dangerous." Arthur's face drained of color. He set his tea down with shaking hands. "You mean—" he began. Albus held up a hand. "I do not want to frighten you without reason," he said gently, "but I need to see the rat." Arthur stared at him, disbelief battling fear. "This is... Albus. This is absurd," he said weakly. "It's a rat." Minerva spoke for the first time, her tone sharp. "In this world, Arthur, rats can be more dangerous than men," she said. Arthur swallowed. He looked between them, then nodded slowly. "All right," he said, voice tight. "All right, if you think... if there's even a chance?" Albus nodded. "Thank you," he said. Arthur rose, hands shaking. "I'll fetch it," he said, then paused. "But why now? Why?" Albus's gaze softened. "Because a man has returned," he said quietly. "And because the story we have told ourselves may not be the whole story." Arthur's eyes widened. He opened his mouth, then closed it, as if realizing he was about to step into something far deeper than he had expected when he accepted Albus' invitation. He nodded again, stiff. "I'll fetch it," he repeated, and left the office quickly. When the door closed, Minerva exhaled sharply. "This is dangerous," she said. Albus nodded. "Yes," he murmured. In the hidden safe house beyond the grounds, Sirius waited, restless, pacing like an animal too long caged. He could feel the moment approaching the way one felt thunder before lightning struck. The air tightened. The world held breath. If Peter was truly hiding as a rat, today could be the day the lie cracked. If not, Sirius' hope might shatter again. He pressed his forehead against the cold window pane and stared out at the gray world, listening for a sound he could not yet name. Time did not move normally when you were waiting for your life to change. It stretched, thin and cruel. Sirius paced the small room, boots soft on stone, hands clenched and unclenched. The stew from the night before sat heavy in his stomach, a warmth he still did not quite trust. His body ached in new ways, healing aches, the kind that came when muscle remembered what it was supposed to do. He wanted a wand. He wanted the comfort of wood in his hand, the familiar hum of power. Without it, he felt like a man holding his breath underwater. He could survive, but not forever. The fire crackled. Outside, wind whispered through trees. Sirius listened for footsteps. Every creak of the building made his head snap up. He was poised like a spring, half in the past, half in the future. Albus had left him hours ago, saying only, "Wait." Sirius hated waiting, yet he had agreed. He had promised himself he would not ruin this chance with impatience. He sat finally on the edge of the bed, elbows on knees, and stared at his hands. They were still thin, still scarred. Azkaban had left marks that would never fade. He could feel the prison in him like a stain, but he could also feel something else beginning, fragile and sharp. If Peter was caught, everything could change. Sirius imagined confronting him. The memory of Peter's face made his vision blur with rage. Peter had been small, nervous, always seeking approval. Sirius remembered the way Peter would laugh too loud at James' jokes, the way he would hover near Remus when Remus grew quiet, as if proximity could grant safety. Sirius remembered the war, Peter's trembling hands, his eager agreement when Sirius suggested the switch. He had believed Peter weak, and he had mistaken weakness for harmlessness. The truth was worse. Peter had been weak and hungry made cowards into monsters. Sirius' jaw clenched until his teeth ached. He forced his thoughts to Harry again, because Harry was the reason he could not allow himself to become only vengeance. Harry was the reason he had to survive long enough to see daylight again. He saw Harry's small face at the top of the stairs, the way he had flinched, the way he had held himself like someone braced for punishment. Sirius' chest tightened. If he could clear his name, if he could become guardian and truth, perhaps he could pull Harry into something warmer. Perhaps he could give him laughter, stories, a home that did not smell of polish and resentment. He did not let himself imagine too much. Imagination was dangerous. It created expectations. Expectations made failure sharper. Footsteps sounded outside, crunching through snow. Sirius stood so fast the bed creaked. His heart hammered. He moved to the door, hand hovering near the latch as if he could stop the world from entering. His breathing went shallow. The latch clicked. The door opened. Albus stepped inside, snow dusting his shoulders, his eyes heavy. Behind him, another figure moved. Arthur, pale and shaken, clutching something wrapped in cloth close to his chest. Sirius' breath caught, his gaze fixed on the bundle. Arthur saw Sirius and froze. His eyes widened. "Albus," he whispered, voice hoarse. "That's—" Albus lifted a hand. "Sirius is not here to harm you," he said gently. "He is here to tell the truth." Arthur stared at Sirius, then down at the bundle, then back. "Is this—" he began, then swallowed. "Is this about my children?" Sirius' throat tightened. He had wanted this moment with a clean heart, but guilt crawled in. "I'm sorry," he rasped. "I don't want to hurt them. I don't want to hurt you. But if he's there—" Arthur's hands shook. "Percy's had that rat for years," he said, voice trembling. "He found it in the garden when he was little. Molly said it was a blessing, something to keep him company." His eyes flicked to Albus, desperate. "Albus, what are you saying?" Albus's voice was soft, but firm. "Open it," he said. Arthur's fingers fumbled with the cloth. He unfolded it slowly, as if afraid of what would be revealed. Inside was a rat, brown and scruffy, its eyes bright and fearful. It blinked, whiskers twitching. Sirius' entire body went still. Even after 2 years of starvation and cold, even after seeing Harry in the window, nothing had hit him quite like the sight of that small creature. Because he knew it. He knew the way it held itself, the way its gaze darted, the way fear lived in it like a second skin. He smelled it too, beneath the animal musk, beneath the damp fur. There was something else. Something wrong. Something human. Sirius took a step forward slowly, as if approaching prey that might bolt. The rat's eyes fixed on him. For a heartbeat, the creature froze. Then it tried to leap from Arthur's hands. Arthur yelped and tightened his grip. "It's trying to—" Albus's hand moved, quick and precise. A spell snapped through the air, and the rat went rigid, suspended in a shimmer of magic like an insect trapped in amber. Sirius' breath came out in a ragged sound. His vision tunneled. All the years of Azkaban, all the hunger, all the cold, everything narrowed to that trapped creature. "That's him," Sirius whispered, voice shaking. "That's him. That's Peter." Arthur stared, horror blooming. "No," he whispered. "No, it can't be. That's Percy's pet." Albus's eyes were grave. "Animagus," he said softly. "Unregistered, I suspect." Arthur's face went ashen. "He's been in my house," he whispered, voice breaking. "In my children's beds, at my table." Sirius' hands trembled. He stepped closer, eyes burning. The rat's eyes rolled, frantic. The creature's fear was almost comical, except Sirius knew what it hid. "Change him," Sirius said, voice low and fierce. "Make him show what he is." Albus held the rat suspended and looked at Sirius for a long moment. "If we do this," he said quietly, "there is no going back. The world will shift." Sirius' laugh was bitter. "It shifted the night they died," he said. "It just didn't shift for the right reasons." Albus nodded once. His wand, now drawn, moved with calm authority. "Reversio," he said softly. The rat convulsed in midair. Fur rippled like water. Bone lengthened. The small body stretched and twisted, reshaping with a sickening series of pops. The cloth fell away. The air filled with the sharp scent of transformation and fear. Where the rat had been, a man appeared, thin, balding, face pinched with terror. His hands clawed at the air as if trying to find a hole to crawl into. His eyes darted wildly. Arthur made a choked sound, stumbling back. "Merlin," he whispered. Sirius stared at Peter with a fury so pure it felt like clarity. He stepped forward until he was close enough to see every detail. The twitching mouth, the sweat on the brow, the eyes that could not meet his for long. Peter's gaze flicked to Sirius, and for a heartbeat something like recognition, like pleading, flashed. Sirius' hands clenched. "You," he whispered. Peter's lips moved soundlessly at first. Then he croaked, voice thin. "Sirius?" Sirius' laugh was a broken thing. "Don't," he snarled. "Don't say my name like you ever had the right." Albus's voice was quiet, deadly calm. "Peter," he said, "you will answer questions." Peter's eyes rolled, desperate. I can explain," he babbled. Sirius took another step, rage trembling through him like a storm. The world seemed to narrow again, to that one thin man who had ruined everything. Albus's hand lifted, not stopping Sirius, but warning. "Sirius," he said softly. Sirius froze, breath ragged. He looked at Albus, the old man's gaze steady. The message was clear. Not yet. Not like this. Sirius swallowed hard, every muscle trembling with restraint. His voice came out hoarse. "Prove it," he said. "Make him say it." Albus nodded once. And in that cold room, with snow falling outside and fire crackling within, the truth stood revealed. Naked, trembling, impossible to ignore. The hunt had found its prey. Now came the harder part, making the world believe what it did not want to believe. And Sirius, for the first time since Azkaban, felt something almost like victory, sharp and bitter and terrifying, because victory meant the story was not over. It was only beginning.